Social Security is going bankrupt. Social Security is full of fraud. Social Security is paying out to people who are 150 years old. Social Security is getting gutted. In reality, all of this is probably wrong. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are claiming that Social Security is paying out to dead people and also undead people, and that there are more eligible Social Security numbers than there are citizens. They quote millions and millions of people over 100 years old are collecting Social Security payments, and that Social Security is, quote, a Ponzi scheme. President Trump even carved a little time out of his address to Congress to bash Social Security, claiming that the database of Social Security recipients includes more than 20 million people over the age of 100 years old.
Believe it or not, government databases list 4.7 million Social Security members from people aged 100 to 109 years old.
Of course, none of this is even remotely true, and we'll get to why. But President Trump and Elon Musk have decided that the best way to improve Social Security is to slash jobs, close offices, and shut down the customer service phone line of the Social Security Administration, and this is likely only the beginning of their plans for the agency. And as Elon has bemoaned on his putative way out of the door, it's pretty hard to fix things you don't understand. So when DOGE conducted an investigation into the rate of fraud in Social Security, it found only 2 potentially fraudulent cases out of over 110,000 calls, a mere 0.0018 fraud rate. But the stakes are high with Social Security because an estimated 1 in 5 Americans collect Social Security. Social Security isn't a perfect program, but in its 90 years of existence, it has protected countless people from literal homelessness and starvation. So today we're going to break down what Social Security is, what the legal limits are, why the outlandish claims about it are generally false, what the real problems with the system are, and what can and cannot be done to fix it. Now, to understand the importance of Social Security, we have to understand what existed before it and why it was created. In the 1800s, industrialization caused profound changes in the American economy, living conditions, and familial structures. And over the course of 40 years, the percentage of people living in cities doubled from 28% to 56%. And as more and more people left family farms and small towns to pursue industrial jobs in big cities, many elderly family members were left behind struggling to care for themselves without intergenerational family support. And at the same time that this shift was occurring, lifespans were also greatly increasing. Between 1900 and 1930, the average American lifespan increased by 10 years. Now, this was great news, but it also meant that there were a lot more elderly people who needed economic support. Now, the first somewhat expansive attempt to solve the problem of support for vulnerable people arrived during the Civil War in the form of Civil War pensions. This program paid out a fairly generous pension to disabled Union veterans and the widows and orphans of those veterans. The program expanded over time to also include Union veterans who were elderly but not disabled. At its peak, this program accounted for 37% of the federal budget. But it would take an economic cataclysm in the form of the Great Depression to finally force the development of a more comprehensive social safety net. At the opening bell on Thursday, October 24th, 1929, the stock market lost 11% of its value. And despite efforts to stabilize the market, the situation did not improve. The following week, the market continued to plunge, losing another 12.82% that Monday and 11.73% that Tuesday. The market made some recovery over the next few weeks, but eventually continued on a slow downward slide, losing 89.2% of its value in less than 3 years and dragging the job market and eventually the world economy down with it. Now, some of you may remember the 2008 financial crisis, and as a point of comparison, the 2008 financial crisis lasted for a year and a half. The Great Depression lasted for over a decade and did not end until the start of World War II. During the 2008 financial crisis, unemployment peaked at 10%. During the Great Depression, 25% of the population was unemployed. In the 2008 financial crisis, gross domestic product fell by 4.3%. During the Great Depression, it was 50%. Hunger and poverty were widespread. But this crisis brought about the political will to create a form of social insurance that was called Social Security. Theodore Roosevelt had actually promoted the idea of a social insurance program more than 25 years before his distant relative Franklin D. Roosevelt did in the 1930s. The idea behind the social insurance programs was simple. It was already being practiced in a few dozen European countries by the time Social Security was created. Social insurance is the idea that a group of people could be insured against a defined risk as part of a broader set of social objectives. That might be insurance against disability, death, unemployment, or old age. In 1934, Franklin Roosevelt introduced the idea of Social Security to Congress and created a committee to study the problems it needed to solve. And the following year, Franklin Roosevelt introduced the committee's report to Congress, and the Social Security legislation passed both houses and was signed into law on August 14, 1935. This new legislation created the first nationwide social insurance program designed to provide benefits to retired workers 65 and older. Now, the initial legislation didn't include many of the programs we now recognize as part of Social Security. Medicare and disability coverage would be added later. It did, however, include payments for the elderly, unemployment insurance, and aid to dependent children. Social Security numbers were created in order to process people within the system, and a trust fund was established to hold the funds that would be collected and redistributed. Now, over time, the program was expanded to cover Medicare, disability, and supplemental Social Security payments for low-income people. Cost of living increases were automatically added based on increases to consumer prices, And in its 90 years of existence, trillions of dollars have been paid into Social Security and trillions of dollars have been paid out to beneficiaries. But how exactly does Social Security work? Most people have a vague idea of what Social Security is. Some money comes out of your paycheck, it goes somewhere. And eventually, when you're old, money is deposited into your bank account every month. But one of the most important features of Social Security is that everyone pays into it. The program is funded by payroll taxes. If you work for somebody else, you pay 6.2% of your earnings towards Social Security, and your employer matches that 6.2%. If you're self-employed, you pay the whole 12.4% Social Security tax. Now, that money is then deposited into one of these Social Security trust funds. About 85 cents of every dollar goes into the main Social Security Trust Fund, which pays monthly benefits to current retirees and surviving spouses and children of deceased workers. The other 15 cents goes into a trust fund for people with qualifying disabilities and their families. Now, these trust funds are pay-as-you-go. At the time that Social Security was created, Congress did not want to pre-fund the system. Instead, the taxes from current earners go into the trust fund and are then distributed out to current retirees. And the remainder of the money in the trust funds is invested in U.S. Treasury securities. And the system has remained fairly stable for 90 years, despite plenty of fluctuations in the overall U.S. and world economy, and remains an important source of retirement income for millions of people. And the Social Security trusts cover a range of benefits. The most well-known program is the Old Age Program, which pays out monthly benefits meant to provide a partial income after a person retires. In order to qualify for old age Social Security, a worker generally has to work for 10 years and has to meet the minimum age requirements. If a worker waits until 66 or 67 to retire, then they qualify for full Social Security benefits. If they choose to retire earlier, they get slightly lower monthly payments. And if they retire later, they receive a slightly higher payment. And the amount you get paid is based on the amount of money that you made during your working years. If you make more money and contribute more to the Social Security Trust, then you receive higher payments in retirement. Now, it's important to emphasize here, as the Social Security Administration does in its own publications, that this retirement income is not meant to be comprehensive. It only supplements a retiree's other savings. In January of 2025, the average monthly Social Security retirement benefit was estimated to be around $1,976. But the Social Security Trust Fund also pays benefits to some spouses and ex-spouses of qualified workers and to surviving spouses after the worker has died. The Trust Fund for Disabilities provides income to people who have a mental or physical condition that has lasted or is expected to last at least a year or result in death, including some young people and children. And despite perceptions to the contrary, the Social Security Administration is one of the most efficient agencies in the government. Nearly 70 million people receive monthly Social Security benefits, yet the agency spends less than 1 cent of every dollar of Social Security taxes to manage the program. That's generally far less than private retirement annuity programs. But one of the reasons that Social Security is so popular and successful is that it's not means-tested. Everyone pays into the system and everyone benefits. This keeps costs low because the Social Security agency doesn't have to spend a lot of time investigating the details of people's financial lives before approving them for benefits. And the universality of the program also helps explain its strong public approval ratings. As of the time of this video, about 89% of people say that Social Security should remain a priority for the nation, no matter what the state of the budget deficit. Now, if you want to deny people Social Security benefits, you're probably going to want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, let my law firm, the Legal Team, help. If you've got in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or Social Security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. Now, despite this widespread public approval, Social Security is not without its detractors. From the very inception, Social Security was labeled as a socialist or even communist program, which, depending on your definitions, could possibly be true. FDR defended the program, saying that it was merely, quote, the fulfillment of what Americans have always been doing, a fulfillment of old and tested American ideals. But your mileage may vary and people disagree on the philosophical underpinnings of Social Security. But I'm not a politician or a philosopher, I'm just a lawyer, so let's talk about the legal aspects of it. And soon after its passage, Social Security was the subject of several court challenges. In 1937, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Social Security Act in a pair of cases. In Stewart Machine Co. versus Davis, plaintiffs argued that Social Security's unemployment tax on employers was unconstitutional because it was not an exercise in keeping with the constitutional requirement, since it was not uniformly applied across employers. The court disagreed and upheld the employer tax. And on the same day, in Helvering versus Davis, the court also upheld the payment of old age benefits, finding that Congress had not usurped state powers under the 10th Amendment, because under Article 1, Section 8, Congress has the power to spend money in aid of the general welfare, and Social Security promotes the general welfare. The court emphasized that Social Security had been created to combat the scourge of poverty during the Great Depression, writing that, quote, "The hope behind the statute is to save men and women from the rigors of the poorhouse, as well as from the haunting fear that such a lot awaits them when journey's end is near." And there's also been many efforts over the years to limit the Social Security benefits. In a McCarthy-era case, Fleming versus Nestor, the Supreme Court upheld the termination of old age benefits for a man who was deported for being a member of the Communist Party. The court held that the entitlement to Social Security benefits is not a contractual right that the country owes to anyone who pays into the system, and this potentially sets the stage for the whittling down or changing of benefits over time. And there, of course, have also been efforts to privatize Social Security. In 2005, President George W. Bush proposed a plan that would have partially privatized Social Security. Under this plan, instead of being sent to the Central Social Security Trust Fund, a portion of workers' wages would have been diverted to individual private accounts for investment in stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. And the obvious upside is that it could have generated a lot more funds for individual recipients, but the potential downsides would be that retirement income would deal with the whims of the stock market and could result in a lot of money being siphoned off by Wall Street financial firms via brokerage and management fees. But given the giant amounts of money and the importance of the program in general, it's not surprising that a lot of people have misconceptions about the program, and that has led to a lot of myths. So let's talk about those claims. Is Social Security actually paying 150-year-old people? Is it paying benefits to millions and millions of people over the age of 100? Definitely not. In fact, since 2015, Social Security has a policy that automatically terminates payments to anyone over the age of 115 years old. So literally no 150-year-olds are being paid benefits. And a common theme here and a misconception is that just because someone is in the database doesn't mean they are actually receiving benefits. But there are definitely some people over the age of 100 who are being paid, but definitely not millions and millions of people, as Trump and Elon Musk have claimed. According to the Social Security Administration's own data, only about 90,000 people aged 99 and over are collecting Social Security benefits, which actually makes sense because according to the Census Bureau, there are about 101,000 people in the US in that age range. So what accounts for Elon and Trump's statements that there are a whole bunch of dead centenarians who are still receiving benefits? Well, we can graciously chalk this up to a misunderstanding of the data. The Social Security Administration openly admits that its records are not a comprehensive record of all deaths in this country. The agency relies on a variety of somewhat unreliable sources for its death reports, including family members, funeral homes, financial institutions, postal authorities, and other state and federal agencies. Remember, due to federalist issues, we can't even get a national ID, let alone comprehensive birth and death data at a federal level. Now, this problem could be remedied if Congress decided to authorize a comprehensive collection of death information, but that isn't something the Social Security Administration is equipped or authorized to do without congressional action and funding. And without a comprehensive collection of death data, though, the Social Security Administration has struggled to maintain an accurate database. But this is a very well-known program. The Inspector General for the agency had previously noted this, finding that the agency's Numident database, which is the database that lists every Social Security number that has been issued, was missing death dates for almost 19 million Social Security holders who were born before 1920. And a combination of factors led to this outcome. First, as we already noted, in the US in general, there's not good tracking of death information, and it makes sense that many of the older pre-digital death records would be missing. There's also some people who were listed as having two Social Security numbers who have been marked as dead under one of their Social Security numbers, but not the other. Other people are listed as dead in other databases, but have not been noted as such in the Numident database. And the Social Security Inspector General has recommended that the agency work to correct this database, but those corrections would take time, money, and labor, so they have not been fully implemented. So it's definitely true that there are a lot of people in the Numident database who probably are dead but haven't been marked as dead yet. But it's wrong to claim that they are being paid Social Security benefits, because the agency is already wise to this and has already cut off benefits to everyone over the age of 115 years old. And the numbers of centenarians receiving Social Security payouts roughly matches the number of centenarians counted by the US Census. But this goes back to the thing that we've talked about a lot on this channel, which is that you can rarely find fraud by looking at top-line payout numbers. There is certainly Social Security fraud, but it's the job of the Social Security Inspector General to investigate and root that out. And unfortunately, the data in the spreadsheets are just imperfect, but they're probably not malicious. So that takes us to myth number 2. Is Social Security a Ponzi scheme? Now, this one might depend on your definition of Ponzi scheme, and there are certainly a lot of people who have this belief. It was even the subject of a webpage on the Social Security Administration's official website. That page has now conveniently disappeared, but the archived version still exists to set the record straight. It is true, as the Social Security Administration points out, both Ponzi schemes and pay-as-you-go insurance programs do take money from later participants to pay the benefits of earlier participants. But that's kind of where the similarities end. First of all, a pay-as-you-go program is upfront about where the money comes from and where the money is going. A Ponzi scheme fraudulently dissembles about where the money's come from and where it's going. But also, the pay-as-you-go model is indefinitely sustainable so long as the amount of money coming into the pipeline remains in rough balance with the amount of money going out. Pay-as-you-go systems don't rely on unsustainable progressions or pyramids of payments. That's why Social Security has been able to exist sustainably for 90 years, covering millions and millions of retirees, disabled people, and survivors. Though it is true that recipients of Social Security typically get slightly more benefits than they paid in taxes. But the complicating factor for Social Security is that demographics have changed over time. The US birth rate has fallen significantly and healthcare costs have increased dramatically. And the Social Security Administration projects that if nothing changes, the program will have to start reducing benefits in 2035. But it's not true that that would mean the system is headed towards bankruptcy, as George W. Bush claimed when he pushed to privatize it. It would mainly mean that there would be a reduction in benefits. But this is a fixable problem, though. Congress has several options that would help make the program indefinitely sustainable with no benefit cuts. First, they could raise the retirement age. This is a broadly unpopular option, and for good reason. The age for full retirement is already fixed at 67 years, but by the same token, Americans are living longer, so it might make sense to push back the age of retirement. Just don't tell that to Americans because they friggin' hate that idea. Now, alternatively, obviously Congress could increase the amount of contributions across the board, a tax, calling on all workers and employers to contribute just slightly more. That could help tip the balance of sustainability. But this is also an incredibly unpopular option, with only about a third of people supporting it in a 2010 Gallup poll. Again, Americans hate taxes. Though more than 2/3 of survey respondents supported requiring higher earners to pay more Social Security taxes on all of their income. Though another option supported by 2/3 of survey respondents would be to require higher earners to pay Social Security taxes on all of their income. Because right now, workers only have to pay Social Security taxes on the first $176,000 of income. So once someone has earned $176,000, that 6% or 12% tax is not applied to the rest of the income that they make. So technically, the higher earners are actually paying a smaller percentage of their total income in Social Security taxes. You could also means test the Social Security payments such that the wealthy don't receive payments when they retire. And another option is to change the demographic inputs by allowing more legal workers into the US. In other words, offsetting the decrease in birth rates with more immigrants. But this is not a math problem. Any or all of these solutions would work. It's a political problem. All the solutions are just super unpopular. But that takes us to myth number 3. Is the number of people receiving benefits greater than the number of citizens in the US? In a February post on Twitter, Elon Musk shared a chart from the Social Security database, which displayed a series of age ranges. The numbers in the chart totaled more than 398 million people. And according to census data, the total population in the United States is only 341 million. So armed with these numbers, Elon took to Twitter to proclaim, quote, yes, there are far more, quote, eligible Social Security numbers than there are citizens in the USA. This might be the biggest fraud in history. Except that it's not. The 398 million number likely represents the total number of people who have Social Security numbers. And it's important to understand that many people who aren't currently US citizens still have Social Security numbers. Non-citizens who are legally authorized to work in the US on a temporary basis are given Social Security numbers. So are legal permanent residents. Some people who were born here were issued Social Security numbers, have left the country or given up their citizenship. Some people are issued a second Social Security number because their first Social Security number was the subject of identity theft, and other numbers may be the result of actual fraud, which we'll get to later, but that's probably a tiny, tiny sliver of the numbers in the system. But the most salient fact here is that, once again, having a Social Security number does not mean that you are actually receiving benefits or ever will receive benefits. Before Social Security pays out any benefits, a lot of hurdles have to be cleared, and as a result, there's remarkably low levels of overpayment fraud in the Social Security system. So let's talk about that. How much actual fraud is there? Well, estimates are that there's less than 1% of all the benefits paid out are improper payments. Less than 1%. That statistic is courtesy of the office that actually has the statutory authority and expertise to spend time studying these problems, the Social Security Inspector General's office, which is tasked with promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in the administration of these Social Security programs. No, instead of looking at the work that had already been done on fraud at the Social Security Administration, Musk took a less efficient route. Here he is in Wisconsin campaigning for Republican Supreme Court nominee while wearing a giant piece of cheese on his head, talking with a Doge bro about how they discovered that 40% of Social Security applications made over the phone were fraudulent. Now, when Musk made this claim, he had yet to produce evidence to back it up. So to catch the fraudsters in the act, Doge implemented a new anti-fraud measure that banned filing claims or changing direct deposit information over the phone. The move sparked immediate backlash since many elderly beneficiaries live in rural areas more than 45 minutes away from the nearest Social Security office. But Doge Doge's workaround wasn't much better. If its system flagged a caller as suspicious, the agency would place a mandatory 3-day hold on the application. And during that time, the applicant was required to visit a Social Security office in person to complete the claim. And despite the assertion that 40% of phone-based benefit claims were fraudulent, Doge's investigation found only 2 potentially fraudulent cases out of over 110,000 calls, a mere 18 ten-thousandths fraud rate. And meanwhile, Doge's anti-fraud measures significantly disrupted the Social Security's operation, slowing down retirement claim processing by 25%. And according to the Inspector General's reports, of all the payments that Social Security made between 2015 and 2022, less than 1% of them were improper. And of course, because Social Security issues over $1 trillion in benefit payments annually, even a slight error in the overall payment process can result in billions of dollars in improper payments. So the top-level number can be quite high, but the percentage is still quite low. And it's estimated that between 2015 and 2022, about $71.8 billion in improper payments were made, most of which were improper overpayments. And it's true, $71 billion in improper overpayments over that time period is not chump change, but it's remarkably low given that the benefit system paid out $8.6 trillion during that same time period. Another Inspector General's report from November 2021 found that Social Security issued an estimated $298 million in payments after death to about 24,000 beneficiaries, which isn't insignificant, but certainly isn't, quote, millions and millions of fraudulent people. And as the Inspector General pointed out, this usually wasn't the result of fraud, it was the result of policy and technical errors. The agency, though, was already working on that problem, and as of the time of the report, had already recovered 84 million of that 298 million. And it's worth noting again here that this is a tiny, tiny sliver of the approximately $1.6 trillion of benefits that were paid out by Social Security annually. So overpayments are definitely one form of fraud, but there's another kind of fraud that, believe it or not, is actually beneficial to the Social Security Trust Fund's bottom line, though it is, as we have to point out, still quite illegal. So what kind of fraud could lead to more money coming in? Well, there's actually a significant number of people who pay into the Social Security system fraudulently. These people are often undocumented immigrants who need to have a Social Security number in order to work. So they will use a fraudulent number, do the work, and pay Social Security taxes without ever being able to benefit from the Social Security system. This is still a form of identity theft, which can be quite problematic if a living person's Social Security number is used. But purely in terms of dollars and cents, it's economically beneficial to the Social Security bottom line. In 2022 alone, undocumented immigrants are estimated to have contributed $25.7 billion to Social Security and $6.4 billion to Medicare. Now, you might be asking why the Social Security Administration hasn't done even more to combat improper payments to dead people. And that's a fair question, but there are always trade-offs involved. If the agency makes it too difficult to get payments, if it, for instance, lowers the age of automatic benefits cutoffs from 115 to 100, that has real ramifications for elderly people. There is no free lunch. It's a question of what direction do you want to err? Do you want type 1 error or type 2 error? Do you want to crack down on improper payments at the risk of cutting off people who rightfully deserve payments? Or do you want to maybe allow the relatively minimal improper payments to make sure that the deserving get their cut? And there's not necessarily one right answer here. It's a question of trade-offs. And one recent story in the Seattle Times illustrated the dangers of improperly cutting off payments. 82-year-old Ned Johnson woke up one day to find himself officially dead. His wife Pam received a letter in the mail from his bank informing her that it had received notification of his death and had clawed back $5,200 in Social Security benefits from his bank account, in accordance with the agency's policies. He then had to spend weeks battling with Social Security to get himself electronically resurrected. Eventually, he was able to arrive in person at a Social Security office, one of the Social Security offices that Doge plans to close, and wait in line for several hours in order to prove his status as one of the living. And Social Security pledged to fix the error, but as of the publication of Mr. Johnson's story, though, he still hadn't received his benefits. And for many elderly people, this kind of interruption of benefits could have profound implications, causing them to miss rent or not be able to pay for groceries. So historically, the Social Security Administration has moved with caution before terminating benefits. But this didn't stop the Trump administration from filing an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court on May 2nd, asking for permission for Doge to access sensitive data from the Social Security Administration. But what's particularly interesting is to see how the media reacted to the filing. Over 270 sources cover the story, with about 70% coming from the center, a little over 20% from the left, and only 10% coming from the right. And when you examine the headlines, you see some very different frames emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events that are unfolding. The few sources reporting from the right typically use muted language like Trump asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on the issue, or that Trump asked the courts to lift a block. The left, however, used more dire terms, as we can see here. Then from the center, the most common theme was to frame the story around what the Trump administration wants to accomplish, suggesting the observations are from an objective third-party observer, which can be its own type of bias. Because the headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news. And that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as I can, which I can with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now, they're offering Legal Eaglets 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. So you can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. Or simply download the Ground News mobile app and enter LegalEagle, all one word, as the discount code. Because Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. One of my favorite parts is their bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources you've never heard of, where there's no telling who owns it or what agenda they might have. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum, like the related story of the Senate confirming Frank Bisinano, a Wall Street executive and former technologies CEO, to lead the Social Security Administration. This story was almost entirely ignored by right-leaning media. And this type of analysis helps explain why we often talk past each other and why some people seem hyper-focused on what seems like nonsense or fake news. But this is why Ground News is my favorite way to get the news. And as a Legal Eaglet, you can save 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code on screen or clicking the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and Blind Spot feed. And by subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. So click the link below or scan the code today. And after that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.